All right, I'm starting. If you're not finished with your key up at the top, you can do it when we move on to that next word, okay? So we're going to start with boundary types. You should have read about it a little bit in chapter 10, but now we're going to like map real world examples and kind of annotate this map, okay? So this will be like our notes for today, our short mini lesson. And then you guys will apply these terms to your country when we get back from lunch. Okay, so the first one we're going to do is mountains. I don't care what color you use. I'm going to use brown because that's what we normally do on our sketch map, but whatever color you have is great. Okay, so there are two different boundary types. There are natural boundary types and artificial boundary types, okay? Pretty self-explanatory. Natural occurring boundary types are those things that are just naturally occurring in the world, right? They're going to go along with physical features of the world. So the mountains, the deserts, the water, right? Those are things that are just already on Earth's surface, and so those are natural. The artificial ones we'll get to in a little bit, but those are ones that are going to be man-made by people, right? Artificial means fake, right? And so it's going to be dealing with people, and we'll talk about those here in a little bit, okay? But the first ones we're going to do is mountains. So if we're looking at a natural boundary of a mountain region, where is one region, I guess, yeah, what mountain range did we just draw on our sketch map? That was, everybody's taking their map quiz, right? Everybody's in here? Yeah. Which mountain range separates two continents? The Ural Mountains, right? Let's draw it. Yeah. I'm going to zoom in. Maybe. Here we go. Here's my mountain range, the Urals. So this side over here is Asia, and to the west is Europe. Right? All right, so mountain ranges don't only separate continents, they can separate different states, different countries, different regions, right? It doesn't only have to separate continents. Can you think of another mountain range that separates two states, aka countries, JT?
The Italian Alps.
Okay, the Alps. Yeah, I'm thinking one of in Asia. The Himalayas, right? Let's draw the Himalayas. We're going to come back over to this region a little bit, so be aware of that because we're going to label some more stuff over here, but we have the Himalayas. I'm going to draw my... What is to the north of it? China, and this is India, right? So the mountain range, though, is the Himalayas. All right, so those are easy. Those are the ones that make sense. Yeah. Oh, what is that? I don't know. That was an accident. That's what it is. Well, erase it. It's brown, whatever. I didn't mean to do that. It was an accident. All right, let's go on to the next one. We had deserts. Whatever color you have for deserts, get out your deserts. Okay, whatever color for your deserts. Let's do deserts. So So the really big desert, we're not going to label this one in Africa because we're going to come back and talk about Africa even more. But we know that the Sahara is in Africa, right? And so that desert is going to naturally separate two really different types of people, or there's more than just two types, I guess, in Africa. But there's a whole bunch of different nations in Africa, right? Nations mean people, right? Because we talked about that the other day. So north of the Sahara is culturally alike. Do you remember what types of people live there from Unit 3? Do you remember drawing the religion map and our arrows going across northern Africa? What religion is there? Islam, right? And so when you're Islam, you most of the time will speak Arabic, right? So Arabic, Muslims live to the north or in northern Africa. And then you have the Sahara. And south of the Sahara is also known as sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so if you see that on a test or on a somewhere, sub-Sahara just means below, right? Sub means below. So beneath the Sahara, to the south of the Sahara, you have all of these different culture groups, okay? You'll see it, if it wasn't in chapter 10, I think we'll look at it in chapter 11 maybe, with colonialism and imperialism, right? All of the Europeans will go down there in the 1800s and just start dividing all of these different groups, okay? But with imperialism, they tried to push Christianity down there, okay? But there's lots of different tribal groups, and they all have their own either languages and religions or whatever it is. And so the Sahara then separates those two very different groups, right? To the north, Islamic, Arabic nations, and to the south it's tribal groups. Okay, so the Sahara is a natural border there. Okay, another one that we have that we can see in China over here is the Gobi Desert. It separates Mongolia, so I'm gonna draw a bunch of little dots right here, and Mongolia is about right there. So it's going to be the borderline right here between, this is Mongolia, and China's to the south of it, okay? This is the Gobi Desert. Another desert region that we have in the Middle East is the Rub al Khali. I believe I'm saying that right. I don't know if I am. And it's in Saudi Arabia. All right, here. It's a huge desert. Okay, so here's my desert. To the north of it is Saudi Arabia. And then we have Yemen and Oman towards the south. Okay, so Yemen is this way. Saudi Arabia is to the north. Okay, this is the Rub al Khali. Let me write that out for you. RUB ALKHALI. You can write desert too, so you'll know. Okay. So all of these deserts are going to separate different countries here. Okay, the Sahara separated cultural groups within that region. These deserts are separating more countries, okay, or states. Okay, that's what we have for deserts. Let's go on to water. So get whatever color you have for water. All right, so water is an easy one, right? Because it's going to separate different regions. The easiest one that you'll probably know is the one that separates us to the south, right? What river is this? What? Yeah, the Rio Grande, right? Rio Grande, whatever you want to say. Okay? It's the same thing. So this is the Rio Grande. And it separates the U.S., right, from Mexico. That's an ugly S. And this is Mexico down here. Right, so that's a natural water border. What else? What's another water feature that can separate places? Oceans. And since we're in the U.S., lakes, right? Which lakes in the U.S. separate us? The Great Lakes, right? The Great Lakes are going to separate us in Canada, right? We have Canada up here in the U.S., obviously where we are, but the Great Lakes are going to separate there. Great Lakes, yeah. All right, and the last water feature, you guys said it already, but oceans, right? Let's go over to Australia because they're an island, right? So they have, here's my waves, okay? They're surrounded by water. This ocean is going to separate them, right? We have the Indian over here and the Pacific over here. This is Australia. That's not us, it's the next bell. Okay, so oceans, these are easy ones, right? So all three of these natural types of borders are in the world already, right? Like they've been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of millions of years, right? So they make sense. They are logical. These are boundaries that are really not going to change over time, right? Because if they do change, it's going to take like millions of years, right? Like a river might eventually meander and change a border, but that's not going to happen in our lifetime, right? That takes like millions or thousands of years for that to happen, right? So these natural borders, like a desert's just not going to evaporate, right? A mountain range isn't just going to move, okay? So these are borders that are going to stay consistent, and they make sense, right? It's a natural separation, okay? The next ones that we're going to talk about are the ones that are human-made, okay? So they might be a little more confusing. So let's go with geometric. Yeah, I can do geometric before the bell rings. Okay, so geometric lines are pretty much just like straight lines, okay? The biggest one, the one that's going to make most sense to us is over here back in the U.S. The straight line that divides us and Canada is a geometric line, okay? It's going to run all the way across here, okay? Anyone know what that's called? 49th parallel, yes. It is the 49th parallel because it's the northern latitude line, right? Latitude, flatitude, okay? So the U.S. is divided between Canada right across that 49 degrees north mark all the way over to the Great Lakes just about, okay? So this line, I'm going to flip my map. You can flip yours as well because you need to know that the term for this is antecedent. We need to write it out. Antecedent, A-N-T-E C-E-D-E-N-T, antecedent. Anyone taking Spanish?
Yes. Me.
What does the, what is it, a pronoun, a whatever? What does antes mean? Before, right? So if we put that into context here,
Prefix?
this is prefix. Yes, that's the word I was looking for. So if we put that into context here, antecedent is going to mean that this border was made before people settled here. Okay, so write that out. Border before settled, or before settlement, okay? Border before settlement.
How can that be possible?
Well, think about it. So before westward expansion, right? Think back to your 8th grade years. Before westward expansion, the U.S. and Canada kind of made their lines before people were even really out in the west part of the U.S. They drew that line. They knew the Pacific Ocean was over there, so they drew that line across the 49th parallel and said, hey, all the way over to the Great Lakes. Okay, everything to the north wasn't it French-owned, and everything to the south was going to be Great Britain. Okay, and then our colonies happened, and then it became the U.S., right? And then we had a full-on westward expansion when explorers actually got all the way over to the west coast, okay? And so before people were out there, that's just kind of where the agreement was, that to the north was going to be Canada or French territory, right? And to the south was going to be this other territory, okay? And then hundreds of years later, now it's still a border. Now it's just between Canada and U.S. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. Another example really quick of this is going to be, I think they talked about it in the book, where, zoom in, Korean Peninsula. Korean Peninsula. Oh, I forgot one. It's okay. We'll do Korean Peninsula. Draw a line, half it. What does that separate? North Korea and South Korea, right? We have North Korea up here and South Korea down here. This is known, draw a line out to the into the ocean. This is the 38th parallel. Oh, where am I go? There we go. 38th parallel. And I'll explain it to you when you get back from lunch. All right, so we finished right before lunch, the 38th parallel, okay? You should have read about it a little bit in chapter 10. The 38th parallel is going to separate North and South Korea, right? So during the 50s, when the Korean War was happening, the war didn't really ever end. It was kind of just like a ceasefire. It's kind of just put on pause, to be really honest. And they decided that they were going to put this wall up in between North Korea and South Korea. And this line on the 38th parallel is what separates it, okay? What is it known? There's a term for it, for the 38th parallel. What is this area called? Anyone know? Yeah, the DMZ. What does it stand for? Demilitarized zone. Yeah, okay. So with it being demilitarized, you would think that it is not militarized or not guarded, and that is actually false. Both sides, North and South, have troops on that border who pace up and down, you know, with guard dogs and all sorts of stuff, and they guard it, okay? It is heavily guarded because they want to keep people out, all right? And so because of that, we're going to know that this is also militarized, okay? This is a militarized border. I know, it says demilitarized, but it actually is. It's fully militarized, okay? It is heavily guarded. So some of your countries in a little bit, when you start looking it up, some of you might have militarized zones, depending on which country you have, if it's a conflict spot. Or some of you might not have militarized zones, okay? So that's the 38th parallel. All right, it's along the 38 degree north mark, right? So if you need to write that down, 38 degrees north, you can, all right? Because you should know that that's where it splits. That's the line that it runs across, okay? And then I also forgot another geometric border over here in the U.S. So go back to the U.S. I forgot one earlier. So on a smaller scale, the state of Wyoming right here.
Hey, that's where I was born.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Wyoming is a square, okay? And its borders are along longitude lines. So we just talked about how 49th parallel, 38th parallel, those are latitude lines, right? Well, Wyoming's borders are along longitude lines, okay? So the border on the west is 112 degrees west, and the border on the right, or the east border, the eastern border, is 105 degrees west, okay, because those are longitude lines, okay? So that's another example. Let's write longitude, so that way we know here that this is a longitudinal line instead of a latitude line, okay? All right, that is it for geometric. Let's get our next color. Next color is whatever for you, but we're going to be talking about cultural. Okay, so our biggest cultural border that we have is going to be over here in South Asia. Okay, so we know that this is India, right? And over here we have to the west of India, we have Pakistan. And to the east of India, we have what country? Do you know? No. No. Bangladesh. Ah, yes, Bangladesh. Okay. We have Bangladesh. Okay. So, a little bit of history for you. India. Anyone know who colonized India? UK. Yeah. I heard a mixture of things. It's UK, Great Britain, right? So India was a colony of Great Britain for a really long time, okay? And when Great Britain left, they just kind of pieced out, okay? They didn't really have a say over, they didn't really kind of oversee who was going to overtake the government or how people were going to settle. It was just a really big land. It kind of included Pakistan and Bangladesh. And then when they left, they kind of just let everybody fend for themselves, okay? And so what happened is that there were two cultural groups here. What religions do you think were here? Islam and what is India right now? Hinduism, right? Okay, so this is a cultural border right here because the Muslims ended up in Pakistan and Bangladesh. Okay, I'm going to put Muslims are in P and B. Okay, so Muslims are in Pakistan and Bangladesh, and the Hindus are in India. Okay, so they kind of fought over this war. They had a skirmish because they were all kind of mixed in together, but culturally they were different. They were either Hindu or they were Muslim, okay? And so they were kind of mixed in, and eventually what happened is that the Hindus all moved into India and the Muslims moved into Pakistan and what is now Bangladesh. It wasn't Bangladesh before. Before it was Bangladesh, it was Pakistan. Pakistan was split into two. It had two different parts, and so it was Pakistan east and west, basically. Okay, there were two different chunks of Pakistan, and that's where the Muslims settled. Okay, so if there were Muslims who were kind of on the India side, they kind of moved into either Pakistan or what's now Bangladesh. Okay, and if there were Hindus who were living in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, they moved back into India, and they kind of culturally made these borders themselves. Okay, the Hindus are primarily in India and the Muslims settled in Pakistan like 1 and 2, and then eventually Bangladesh became Bangladesh. Okay, they separated into separate countries, Pakistan and Bangladesh. Okay, but that's a cultural border because they naturally separated themselves there because of that cultural / religious difference there. Okay, so a term for this cultural border, I guess, is subsequent. You need to know what subsequent is. Okay, so subsequent are really just borders that are drawn to accommodate ethnicities. Accommodate different ethnicities. Okay, that's what a subsequent border is. So that is what happened in Pakistan and Bangladesh and India. Okay, they made these borders because everybody moved to be with each other, right? As humans, we tend to gravitate towards people who are like us, right? So the Muslims went one way, the Hindus went another way, and that is what subsequent is, okay? They made those, they drew those lines because that's where those those ethnicities gathered, okay? So that's what subsequent is, right? That's it for cultural. Grab your next color. What's my next one? Pink. Actually, before you do that, grab your pencil or your pen or whatever original color you have. Mine's black. I want to show you all of the different nations. These circles right here are going to represent all of the different nations in Europe. Okay, those are all, you could say, all little different cultural or ethnicities. Okay, those are different nations. These are going to be ethnicities in Africa. All right, now grab whatever color you were gonna grab. So that's kind of our background. That's what you have to know about Africa, okay? Lots of different nations, lots of different tribal groups, okay? Like hundreds. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of different types of cultural groups in Africa, okay? When imperialism hit, the Europeans who are up in Europe, all of those major power players, right? They pretty much used up all of their resources that they had in Europe, okay? So they started looking for other land, other territories, other people that they could kind of conquer. That way they could use their resources, okay? So with the Berlin Conference, did it talk about the Berlin Conference in chapter 10? No? Okay, it's coming. That's what you're going to read in chapter 11, okay? The Berlin Conference happened in, what year was it? Late 1800s sometime. All the European power players met at Berlin. They slapped a map of Africa down on the table and they said, okay, draw your lines. What part of Africa do you want? So France drew their lines and Belgium drew their lines and the UK drew their lines. They just started dividing up Africa as if it was almost like a card game, okay? They just kind of chose which areas of Africa they wanted based on the resources that they knew were there, the minerals, the diamonds, the whatever raw materials that they knew were there. They just started partitioning off Africa. But do you think that an African tribal leader was at that meeting in Berlin? They weren't, okay? So Europe just decided to do this. All of these strong MDC countries, right? They just started breaking up Africa like it was nothing because they knew that they were just going to roll right in there and take whatever they wanted, okay? So that's why in Africa you see mostly straight lines, okay? So I know that this isn't exactly the way the map looks in Africa, but that's okay. The main idea here is that you know that the most straight lines that you see on a map are in Africa. Yeah, and these are political lines, okay? The political lines that you see on a map are really the ones that everyone sits down and determines, hey, this is what it's going to be. The UN is going to recognize those borders. That's a political boundary, okay? And Africa is the best example here, okay? So no, that's not exactly what the borders look like in Africa, okay? I know that those are just a bunch of straight lines, but this was what happened as a result of European colonialism, okay? So draw your arrows so that we know this is from European colonialism. Colonial borders. All right, and we have another term that goes along with this, like we had with subsequent. Now we have superimposed. Superimposed boundaries are just borders that are drawn over existing borders, okay? So before the Europeans got there, the African tribes had kind of grouped up already with their own tribes, okay? And then the Europeans went in there and just drew these lines right over, okay? They didn't pay any attention, or did they care? They did not even care about which groups were where. So they could have drawn their line smack dab in the middle of a tribal group, and they did not care. So now a tribal group who is one nation now might be split across two different states, okay? Going back to our terms that we learned about the other day. So this one nation of a tribal group is now in 2 or 3 different countries just because Europe said, hey, now these are countries, okay? And so when they came in and drew all of these lines, that's superimposed, okay? So let's write it down. Borders that are drawn over existing borders. All right, so knowing what we know about Africa, when the Europeans eventually left, mostly in the 1900s, okay, the European nations started pulling out of there, and they just kind of left Africa with these borders that are now countries, technically, because they drew these lines on a map, so now these are countries, but we still have all of these nations that are spread apart, okay? That's why whenever Europe left, they just, again, left these countries to fend for themselves. Now we have to figure out what type of government we're going to set up, who's going to rule who, what rules are we going to have for everybody, right? Laws. How are we going to do this, okay? And when you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 different nations or tribal groups represented in one country or in one state, do you think that that is going to happen easy, figuring out a government to set up? No, it doesn't. That's why Africa has so much conflict. That's why Africa is still LDC countries, right? Think back to Unit 1. Most of Africa is still less developed because of all of the conflict, and nobody has really come in to help them figure out how to take these resources and take them to the next level, right? Of secondary and tertiary jobs to kind of improve their infrastructure, make them more developed, right? That's why Africa still is the way it is, because there's just so many tribal groups and they can't get along, okay? So subsequent borders, lines drawn over already existing borders. Okay? Make sense? All right. So that is our boundary types. I don't think I'm missing any. Yeah, no, got them all. All right. Let's go over to morphology. So grab a different color, whatever you want. I'm going green because I haven't used green yet. What? We're gonna, so because we didn't really touch in Europe and in Southeast Asia and South Africa or South America, we're gonna look at some different shapes right now with morphology. Okay, those are just the best examples for these boundary types that make the most sense. So that's why we did those where we did them in. Okay, I think in your book or previously we have taught morphology. Morphology just means the shapes of states, okay? So we have taught morphology using Africa, but since Africa already has so much like political borders there, we decided to choose different countries to show the shapes of states or morphology, okay? So that's what we're gonna use examples there, okay? So up in the top right hand corner, wherever you put it, we have 5 different shapes that I believe, yeah, it was covered in chapter 10. So the first one is going to be compact. We're going to make a key compact, elongated, prorupted, perforated, I'm gonna write it right there. Perforated, and then fragmented is the last one. Okay, so these are all different shapes of states, okay? So when we look at a compact state is something that is going to be most of the time small, doesn't necessarily have to be a super like micro state, but a compact state is something that is going to be in a general like round-ish like shape, I guess you could call it, because the government is probably going to be somewhere in the middle, and it's going to be easy for everyone who's on the outskirts to be able to get to the center. So it's going to be mostly round, okay? And the example we're going to use with this is Poland, okay? So Poland, that we know from our map quiz, is in Europe. So find Denmark. That's pretty much Poland. Okay, color it in. All right, so we know that this is Poland. Since we're in Italy, we're going to go back to our key up here. A perforated state is going to be Italy. A perforated state is one that has inclusions of something else, right? We have, it totally engulfs another country. Okay, so Italy is a good one because what are two micro states that are in there? Vatican and San Marino, right? Okay, so Italy is a good example here. All right, I'm not gonna leave my two out because they're too small here, okay? But I am gonna shade in Italy so that we know. Label it. Let's go to prorupted. Prorupted means it just has like an arm or an awkward like land, like piece of land that's jutting out somewhere. Okay, so anything like with a peninsula in its country, that would be a proruption. The example that we're going to use is Thailand. Where is Thailand?
In Asia.
More specific, Asia's huge. Southeast Asia, right? All these little countries over here. Okay, so Thailand is about like that. And goes down. It gets really skinny, right? Looks like it will almost be cut in half. And it goes down. The very tip of it is not Thailand. What's on the very end of Thailand? What country is that? Do you know? Singapore. Singapore.
Good one.
Haha, funny, Liv. This is Thailand. Okay, so anything that has an arm. The U.S. would be a proruption because we have Florida sticking out. Texas, even the state of Texas, right? Because we have a little arm sticking out. The Democratic Republic of the Congo in Africa has a weird little outlet because, again, when the Europeans were breaking it up, I think France had the DROC, but France needed a waterway. Most of the DROC is in the middle of Africa, and it has this weird little arm sticking out to the coast because, again, they wanted a port, right? Because that makes sense. They didn't want to have to go through another territory to get to their territory, so they just drew this line with a little arm touching the ocean, so that way they could get into their country. Okay, so anything that has a weird arm, that's going to be a proruption, okay? While we're in this area, let's go ahead and do fragmented. So a country for fragmentation. Fragmentation just means there's going to be several parts to it, right? It's fragmented, multiple parts to it. So what could be an example in Southeast Asia? Yeah, Philippines is a really good one, okay? That's the one that I was thinking of. But there are multiple. What else could it be? What? Indonesia? Yeah, Alaska could be a state too, right? That would be fragmented. Okay, so this is the Philippines. You could do Indonesia. You could do Malaysia, right? There's a bunch of them in this area of the world that could be considered fragmented, okay? So this is the Philippines. 1 L, 2 P's. I always forget. Okay, so that's the Philippines. That's a fragmented state. The Philippines, yep. And then lastly, elongated. If you think about it, elongated, it has the word long in it. It's something that's going to be very skinny. Okay, so a good example of this is going to be Chile in South America. Oh, I put it.
That was a really good one. That's really good.
Right, long and skinny all the way down.
Wow.
Color it in. This is Chile. Okay. Oh, one thing I forgot. Grab your normal pencil or pen. One thing I forgot to talk about is Europe. Melody, I don't know why I didn't remember this when you asked me about Europe. Borders, back to boundary types. Remember, we have all of these 6 different types: mountain, deserts, water, geometric, cultural, political. In Europe, what's special about Europe?
They're open.
Yeah, they have open borders, right? The EU. They have some different cultural differences there, right? But for the most part, like historically, they kind of have that in common, right? Like these powerhouses that have been there for forever, and now they have this open border system with trade and people and movement, right? You can go across the borders, and it's not a big deal, right? Whenever I lived there, I was mad because I didn't get stamps in my passport because I just jump on a train and go to a different country, and it was awesome, but I didn't get a stamp because it's open borders. You didn't have to go through customs every time I crossed a border, because it was the EU, right? They have those open borders, okay? So in Europe, the EU has allowed it to be open. So those boundaries there are open, okay? Now you'll have rivers and stuff that might separate, or the Alps, right, that separate different countries. But for the most part, trains and technology have kind of helped us get around that, where the EU is pretty much just open borders, right? For the most part. Okay, make sense? All right, so that's it for today. Take a picture of it. You are going to put it on your Padlet, but we're going to apply these different terms that we talked about now with your own country, all right?